As I passed Ethan's room, I heard something. A low sound. A groan. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to make me pause. Concerned, I pushed the door open without thinking. What I saw made my breath catch. Ethan lay on the bed, shirtless, his body gleaming faintly with sweat. His legs stretched out, one hand gripping the sheets, the other hidden beneath the blanket. His chest rose and fell in shallow, urgent breaths. His eyes were closed, lips parted. I froze, stunned. I knew I should leave, should back out quietly and pretend I hadn't seen anything. But I didn't. Something in me, something I didn't recognize, rooted me to the spot. He opened his eyes, and he saw me. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then his lips curled into a slow, knowing smirk. "Didn't mean to interrupt," I said, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. My feet moved on their own, one step into the room, then another. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure he could hear it. Every logical part of me screamed to stop, to turn around, but I couldn't. I was pulled forward by something deeper, something I didn't want to name. I sat on the edge of his bed, trembling. He didn't say a word. He just watched me, his gaze intense, unwavering. The air between us was thick, charged, forbidden. What happened next wasn't explosive. It was quiet, almost reverent. A moment of surrender, of crossing an invisible line we could never uncross. I left his room hours later, silent, shaken, and unable to look at my own reflection in the hallway mirror. I locked myself in the bathroom and stared into the sink, water running, hoping it could wash away my guilt. But it didn't. I barely slept that night. The next morning, sunlight poured through the windows as if mocking me. I stayed in bed longer than usual, curled up in the sheets I couldn't seem to escape from. Eventually, I forced myself up, showered, and slipped into a loose sweater and jeans. I tied my hair into a messy bun and told myself I could pretend nothing had happened. I stepped into the kitchen and stopped. Ethan was there, shirtless again, eating cereal at the counter like it was any other day. His hair was damp from a shower, messy and casual. He looked up at me and smiled, slow, deliberate. "Morning, Melissa." I mumbled something in return and headed straight for the fridge. My hands trembled as I reached for the eggs. "You look different today," he said, his tone teasing. I slammed the fridge door harder than necessary. "Eat your breakfast," I snapped. He chuckled, low and amused. Touchy. I cracked the eggs into the pan, focusing on the sizzle, willing him to stop talking. But I felt him move behind me, not touching, just close enough to feel the heat of him. "You don't have to pretend," he said softly. "I know you felt it too." I dropped the spatula. "Stop," I said, my voice barely steady. "It was a mistake." I turned to face him, ready to draw a line in the sand, but when I met his eyes, I saw no regret, only hunger, and something darker, possessiveness. "You want it again, don't you?" he whispered. I shook my head, but the denial came too late. He stepped closer. His hand brushed my waist, a light touch that still left a mark. My body betrayed me. I leaned in. "No," I whispered again, but the word had no power. He leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. "You're mine now," he said. I pushed him away, breathing hard. "Don't ever say that again." But the damage was done. I had crossed a line. And deep down, I knew I wasn't ready to go back. That night, David returned home. He hugged me like nothing had changed, but everything had. I stood in his arms, stiff and silent, my heart pounding with guilt. Ethan watched us from the stairs, his expression unreadable. Dinner was unbearable. David talked about his trip. I nodded, smiled, pretended to listen. Under the table, I felt Ethan's foot brush against mine. I dropped my wine glass. David rushed to help. Ethan smirked. Later, David went upstairs to shower. I stood in the hallway trying to breathe when Ethan appeared again. He didn't speak. He just looked at me. And in that look, I saw everything he wanted, everything I feared. I shoved past him, locking myself in the bathroom again. I stared into the mirror and asked myself, what have I done? It had been 4 days since David came home. 4 days of pretending. 4 days of silence and small talk, of carefully chosen words and even more carefully avoided glances. I had become an actress in my own life, smiling at the breakfast table, laughing at the right times, keeping my voice steady when I felt like screaming. And Ethan? He was a ghost and a flame all at once. Always present, always near, always watching. Every time I entered a room, he was there, not speaking much, never pushing, but his eyes said enough. His presence pressed against me, a constant reminder of the moment we had shared, the moment I couldn't stop thinking about. I tried to distance myself. I avoided being alone in a room with him. I made excuses to stay outside longer while gardening, lingered at the grocery store, even signed up for a local yoga class just to be out of the house for an extra hour each day. And yet, the more I tried to cut him out, the more he seemed to slip through the cracks of my carefully constructed routine. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when Ethan walked in. He didn't say anything at first, just sat on the arm of the couch, watching me. I kept my eyes on the towels, focusing on the neatness of the folds, the rhythm of the task. "You don't have to pretend with me," he finally said. I paused, fingers clutching a hand towel. "Pretend what?" "That nothing happened," he said calmly. "That you don't think about it." I looked up, startled. And there it was again. That quiet confidence, the way he looked at me like he knew every secret I was trying to bury. "I'm not doing this," I said, standing. "This conversation is over." "I'm not trying to start anything," he said, raising his hand slightly. I think you're scared of how you felt. That's all." I stared at him, my jaw tight. "I'm married to your father, Ethan." "I know," he said, his voice softer now. "And I'm not trying to mess things up. But we can't pretend that moment didn't happen. You felt it, and so did I." I turned away, gathering the laundry basket. It was a mistake, one that won't happen again. As I walked toward the hallway, he said quietly, "You don't sound sure." I didn't answer. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, one hand resting on my chest to steady my breathing. David was asleep beside me, his back turned. The room was dark, quiet, the only sound the ticking of the clock on the wall. I hated myself for wondering what Ethan was thinking, for imagining him awake, maybe lying in bed, maybe thinking about me too. It was wrong. I knew it. But the thoughts came anyway. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Ethan. "Can't sleep either, huh?" I stared at the screen, heart pounding. I didn't respond. I turned the phone face down and rolled over, willing myself to sleep. A few days later, I was in the kitchen, prepping vegetables for dinner. The window was open, letting in the scent of freshly cut grass. David was upstairs working on a call. It was one of those rare days he was home during the week. Ethan walked in, barefoot, wearing a gray t-shirt and athletic shorts. He grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge and leaned against the counter, watching me slice zucchini. "You're quiet," he said. I didn't respond. He waited a beat. "I've been thinking." I sighed, setting down the knife. "Ethan." He held up a hand. "Just listen. Please." I crossed my arms, reluctantly meeting his gaze. "I know what we did, or almost did, was wrong. I'm not proud of it. But I'm not sorry either," he said quietly, "because it made me realize something." My chest tightened. "This isn't a game." "I know," he said, "and I'm not trying to play one. I'm just asking, why are you pretending you're not miserable?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. "You walk around here like you're fine, like everything's fine, but I see you," he said. "I see the way you look out the window when David's on his third work call of the night. I see the way you hold your breath when we're alone in the same room." I looked down at the counter, suddenly ashamed of the truth in his words. "I'm not trying to ruin anything," he said, "but I think you deserve to be honest with yourself." I stepped away from the counter, trying to breathe. "You don't know anything about my life." "I know enough," he said. "I know that I've never seen you smile the way you did that night." I swallowed hard. "Stop it." He took a step forward. "I'm not going to touch you. I won't unless you ask me to. But I need you to know this. Whatever you felt, I felt it too. And I'm not sorry for that." His voice was low, steady, and terribly sincere. I hated how much it rattled me. "I have to finish dinner," I said, turning my back to him. I heard him leave the kitchen without another word. That evening, I sat across from David at the dinner table, pushing food around on my plate. He looked up from his phone. "You okay?" I nodded. "Just tired." He smiled faintly. "You've been doing a lot lately. Maybe we should plan a weekend away, just the two of us." I forced a smile. "That sounds nice." But even as I said it, I felt the hollowness of it all. David didn't know me anymore. Maybe he never really had, and I couldn't remember the last time I had felt truly seen. The following Sunday, David was away again for a conference. I spent the day cleaning, trying to keep busy. Around dusk, I went out to water the flowers in the backyard. Ethan was out there, sitting on the porch steps, headphones in, sketching in a small notebook. I hadn't known he could draw. I watched him for a moment, unnoticed, before heading to the hose. He looked up eventually, pulling out one earbud. "Hey." "Hey," I said, keeping my eyes on the hydrangeas. "I didn't know you liked gardening so much," he said. "It's peaceful," I replied. He stood and walked over, hands in his pockets. "Can I show you something?" I hesitated, then nodded. He handed me the notebook. Inside were sketches, mostly landscapes, some city scenes, a few portraits. The last page was a drawing of a woman, standing near a window, her hair tied up, her expression distant, thoughtful. I recognized myself instantly. "I drew this the other night," he said, his voice almost shy. "You looked, I don't know, lost." I stared at the lines of the drawing, the tenderness in the details. It was beautiful, and it hurt. "I should go inside," I said, handing it back. He gently caught my wrist before I could turn away. "Please," he said, voice low. "Just 1 second." I looked up at him, and for one terrifying moment I let myself feel it, all of it. The tension, the longing, the ache of wanting something I couldn't name. He leaned in, slowly, cautiously. His lips were inches from mine. I closed my eyes, and then I pulled back. "No," I whispered, "I can't." He stepped back immediately, hands raised, respect in his eyes. "Okay." "I'm sorry," I said, tears starting to prick at the corners of my eyes. "Don't be," he said. "You did the right thing." I nodded, turning away, walking quickly back toward the house. That night, I sat by the bedroom window, hugging my knees to my chest. The moon hung low in the sky, casting shadows through the trees. I thought about the kiss that hadn't happened. The kiss I had almost wanted. The kiss I had stopped. I should have felt proud, relieved. Instead, I felt like I was unraveling. Because even though I had walked away, I wasn't sure I could keep doing it. The next morning began like all others. David sat at the table, sipping black coffee and scanning his inbox on his tablet. His tie was slightly askew, and his hair still damp from the shower. I placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of him. He smiled without looking up. "Thanks, hun." I stared at the steam rising from my own mug. "Mm-hmm." He didn't notice the hesitation in my voice. He hadn't noticed anything in weeks, maybe months. I tried not to resent him for it. "How's work been?" I asked, not because I cared, but because it was what spouses were supposed to ask. "Busy," he said, still scrolling. They might be sending me to Denver next week. Could be a 3-day thing. Maybe more. I nodded slowly. Okay. You good with that? He glanced up finally. I'm always good with it, I said, more truthfully than I intended. His eyebrows lifted slightly, but he didn't push. Instead, he returned to his tablet. The silence between us thickened. Later that morning, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, brushing my hair back into a low ponytail. My eyes were tired, my skin pale. I barely recognized myself anymore. Not just physically, but emotionally. There was a hollowness under my ribs that never seemed to fill, no matter what I did. Ethan had been quiet since the moment on the porch. He hadn't texted. He hadn't waited for me in the kitchen or stopped me in the hallway. And yet, his absence was louder than his presence had ever been. It was like trying not to think about a song stuck in your head. The more I tried to forget, the more he filled the space. I went downstairs and found him already gone, a note on the counter that read, "At the gym." I stared at his handwriting for a long moment. I hated that it mattered to me. That afternoon, I went to the library. I hadn't meant to stay long, but the quiet comfort of bookshelves and soft lighting kept me there for hours. I found a corner table and buried myself in a novel I'd read a dozen times before. A story about a woman who ran away from her life to find herself again. The irony wasn't lost on me. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, I finally stood and checked out the book. On my way to the exit, I passed a young couple in the lobby. She was laughing at something he whispered, her eyes bright, her hand resting trustingly on his chest. That used to be me and David. Or at least I believed it had been. When I got home, the house was quiet. Ethan's bedroom door was closed. David was still at work. I busied myself with laundry, then dinner prep. When I opened the fridge, I found a sticky note attached to a container of leftovers. Ethan's handwriting again. "For you, in case you skipped lunch again." I stared at it for several long seconds, then crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. But I heated the leftovers anyway. That evening, David came home late. He kissed my cheek absently and loosened his tie as he walked through the door. "Long day?" I asked. He grunted. "Exhausting. My boss is breathing down my neck about the Denver pitch." I nodded. "You should eat. I left your plate in the oven." He smiled faintly. "Thanks, Mel." We sat in the living room after dinner, the TV on but ignored. David scrolled through his phone while I stared at the muted images on screen. I felt like a stranger in my own home, in my own skin. Finally, I spoke. "Do you ever think we're just roommates now?" He looked up, surprised. "What?" "I mean, we live together. We share meals. We sleep in the same bed. But do you ever feel like we're just going through the motions?" He stared at me, his expression unreadable. "Where is this coming from?" "I don't know," I said. "I've just been thinking." He set his phone down. "Melissa, if you're unhappy—" "I didn't say I was unhappy," I interrupted. I don't know. I feel invisible sometimes." His face softened. "I didn't know you felt that way. Why didn't you say something?" "Because you're always working," I said quietly, "and I didn't want to add to your stress." He reached for my hand and I let him take it. "I'm sorry," he said. "I don't want you to feel alone. I'll try to do better." I nodded, but the knot in my chest didn't loosen. The next day was warm and windless. I went out for a walk in the early afternoon. The streets in our neighborhood were lined with maple trees, their leaves just starting to turn. I passed by homes with wind chimes, potted mums, and carved pumpkins on porches. Autumn was coming. I stopped at the small park near the end of the block and sat on a bench, watching two kids chase each other around the jungle gym. I remembered when I used to dream of having kids with David. We had talked about it once or twice, but the timing was never right. He was always traveling, and then the months slipped into years, and the topic just disappeared. Now I wasn't sure I could have one with him, not because I didn't want a family, but because I didn't know what kind of family we were anymore. A soft voice pulled me out of my thoughts. "You okay?" I turned. Ethan stood a few feet away, hands in his jacket pockets. I nodded slowly. "Just needed some air." He gestured toward the bench. "Mind if I sit?" I hesitated, then moved over slightly. For a while, neither of us spoke. We just watched the kids play. Finally, he said, "I wasn't sure if I should talk to you again." "I needed space," I admitted. He nodded. "I get it." I turned to him. "I've been trying to figure out what's wrong with me." "There's nothing wrong with you," he said instantly. "I almost kissed you," I whispered. "That's not normal." He looked at me with a seriousness I hadn't seen before. "You're not the only one that felt something, but I meant what I said. I'm not going to push you into anything." I blinked back the sting of tears. I don't know who I am anymore." "You're someone who deserves to feel seen," he said. "That's not a crime." I shook my head. "You're 19, Ethan. You're supposed to be reckless. This is just a phase for you." He leaned forward slightly. "Maybe. Or maybe I see something in you that you forgot was there." I turned away, heart pounding. "I should go," I said, standing. "I'll walk you back," he offered. I didn't say no. Back at the house, we paused outside the front door. "Thank you," I said softly. "For the walk?" he asked. "For not making this harder than it already is?" He gave a small, sad smile. "I meant what I said. I'm here if you ever want to talk." I nodded. We stood there for a second too long. Just before I reached for the door handle, he said, "Melissa." I looked up. He leaned in, just slightly, just enough for his breath to touch my cheek. "If things were different?" "They're not," I whispered. He nodded once, then turned and walked away. I went inside and closed the door behind me, leaning against it, eyes closed. Everything felt like it was on the edge of falling apart. The house felt colder that morning. Not from the weather, it was the same mild September chill, but from something unspoken settling between the walls. David had already left for an early meeting, his coffee cup still half full on the counter. I found myself staring at it, wondering how many mornings we'd shared in silence, thinking it counted as intimacy. Ethan was nowhere to be seen. I was grateful for that. I needed space, for real this time. Not just physical distance, but emotional breathing room. I had spent the past few weeks tangled in confusion, guilt, and longing, and now I was just tired. Tired of pretending. Tired of running from my own reflection. I walked through the house slowly, aimlessly. The quiet pressed into my ears. Eventually, I wandered into the guest room, one we rarely used. It was tidy, untouched, the air slightly stale. I sat on the edge of the bed and let it all catch up to me. The temptation hadn't been the real problem. The real problem had been the emptiness that made it feel like an answer. I had stopped recognizing myself long before that night with Ethan. I had let my identity dissolve into routines, laundry, dinners, polite smiles, social obligations. I had become an extra in my own life, and I had looked for rescue in the wrong place. That afternoon, Ethan returned. I heard him in the kitchen putting groceries away. I stayed upstairs listening to the normal sounds of someone trying to do something helpful. He didn't call for me. He didn't try to talk. I appreciated that. But by evening, I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation forever. I found him out back, sitting on the porch steps again, a hoodie pulled over his head. He looked up when he saw me, but didn't speak. I sat down beside him, wrapping my arms around my knees. "I'm leaving," I said. He turned his head. "What?" "Just for a while. I need time to think. Alone. I booked a place in Door County for a week." He watched me quietly. "Does my dad know?" I shook my head. "Not yet." He nodded slowly, absorbing the weight of my decision. "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said. "I let things get too far. I should have drawn the line sooner." He looked out over the yard, eyes focused on nothing in particular. I'm not mad at you. I know you're not, but I need to be honest. With myself, with David. He turned to me again. Are you going to tell him? I hesitated. Not everything, but enough. He nodded again, understanding more than I said. I don't regret talking to you, I added softly. You reminded me that I was alive, but I can't keep living like I'm waiting for something to change without doing anything about it. He smiled faintly. I get it. We sat in silence for a while, the crickets starting to hum in the distance. Before I stood to go back inside, I placed a hand on his shoulder. Take care of yourself, Ethan. You too. Later that night, I packed a small suitcase and left a note for David on the kitchen counter. David, I'm sorry for the distance between us. I need some time away to think, not about us, but about me. Please don't worry, I'll call you tomorrow. Mel. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know if David and I would find our way back to each other, or if this was the beginning of a much larger change. But for the first time in a long while, I was stepping towards something, not someone, myself.